Here's a segment from a recent Gun Talk radio episode. You can listen to all the Gun Talk radio podcasts however you tune in, or check out guntalk.com for more. All right, it is Gun Talk. I'm glad that you could be with us. I am Tom Gresham. Welcome. We're going to have a great show today. We've got a lot of things, important things to talk about. If you'd like to join us, 866-TALK-GUN is the magic number here. But the big story, the one that we still are talking about, is Eli Dicken, the young man in Indiana who stopped a mass murder in progress. This fellow already had shot several people, and Eli used his personally carried firearm to engage, if you will, to shoot and stop. And eventually the bad guy died. That's kind of the occupational hazard of being a bad guy, if you will. But interestingly enough, he is now represented by an attorney who is a pretty interesting guy. Guy Relford is not only an attorney, he is a firearms instructor, concealed carry instructor. He's a gun guy. Guy, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, absolutely. It's my pleasure, Tom. It's great to be with you.
So, all right, you're a gun guy and a lawyer, and you've represented a lot of people who, the good guy with a gun who have defended themselves. And I know you can't talk about a lot of the details of Eli's shooting, although I'm hoping that you can kind of dispel some of the misinformation that's out there. As I'm looking at this, I got a question for you. And we've read that, Eli did not have formal firearms training, et cetera, et cetera. He'd learned from his grandfather. But there's something, and this goes back to your training as a firearms instructor. I always say that you can't take action like he did suddenly without having put yourself there mentally before. It's like, if this happens, then I will do that mental preparation that we talk about all the time. Anything you can talk about that?
Well, Eli, he's a solid young man. He's a very humble, quiet young man. At the same time, he would tell you that no, he learned how to shoot early on from his grandfather, and really hasn't had any formal training at all. And it's really just what he's done himself, dry firing, quite a bit of dry firing, and that visualization that you've talked about.
Right.
He's a very consistent carrier, carries lawfully. He got his license to carry last year when he was 21. But no, it's an amazing story for me, exactly as you said, Tom, as a firearms instructor, and I'm a training junkie. I try to take 4 or 5 classes a year. I teach a lot of classes, and I'm demoing the drills. And so I spend a lot of time putting rounds down range, and this is pretty miraculous to me. I grew up, my dad was a pastor, and so I kind of grew up in the church. And I got to tell you, I'm looking at this situation with the distance involved and just the incredible marksmanship as announced by the sheriff, or the police chief, I should say,
right,
James Eisen, down in Greenwood, Indiana. The marksmanship, everything that he did is pretty amazing, considering he really does have no formal training.
And the reports are 40 yards. If you shoot a lot, that's doable under the best circumstances, under horrible circumstances of stress and speed and everything else. First of all, was it in fact 40 yards? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, that is exactly what the police chief said. And having been to the mall since then and stepping it off, that's all very accurate.
Wow.
And as far as where the initial shots were taken from and where the initial hits were made. But, we're kind of getting into the nitty gritty of the shooting itself, Tom. And what I've committed to the Greenwood Police Department is until they give us the thumbs up in terms of where they are in their investigation. We just out of respect for the investigation, we're not going to get into real specifics of the shooting itself, but in terms of some of the misinformation out there and what someone goes through in a situation like this, be happy to get into all of that with you.
Right.
And we'll come back, and when we can talk about the shooting itself, because people out there doing the so-called Dicken drill now, which is awesome, but there are going to have to be some elements they add to that drill once they hear all the actual details.
Okay, interesting. All right, here's one. Talk about misinformation. Several people, including Shannon Watt, have said, well, this was illegal. He was breaking the law. You got the people in the Five or the View or whatever it was doing the same thing. Not only were they misinformed, they were, I think, purposefully trying to misinform people. He did have a permit, which a lot of people said, well, it was constitutional carry. And Indiana does have constitutional carry, but he actually did have a permit, right?
Yeah, and there was some confusion on that point early on. When the police first ran his information, they didn't see that he had a license, so it was announced that he did not have a license but was lawfully carrying under our constitutional carry law that just went into effect July 1. Mm-hmm. I actually corrected that. I put out a public statement and actually a redacted copy of what we call here in Indiana a license to carry handgun. Mm-hmm. And he had that and had had it since August of the previous year. What one of the idiots on The View said, I don't watch that show, but I have it all. I have all the video, and also what Shannon Watts said, as you mentioned, is that Eli was breaking the law. And the point they were trying to make is that the mall had a no gun policy. And as you know, Tom, in some states, if you put a particular sign up that meets certain requirements, then it can be a crime to ignore a no firearm sign. Indiana doesn't have that law and never has. And so a mere statement of policy, and all it is there's a code of conduct, and I saw it posted on a pillar in the mall, and it just says no weapons. A no weapons or a no firearm sign in Indiana is just like a no shirt, no shoes, no service, or mask required. It's just a statement of policy. Mm-hmm. And if you violate their policy, they can ask you to leave or deny you service, but you're not breaking the law. And there's absolutely no law that is broken here. I teach this. It's part of my law practice.
Right.
And there's no question about it. The police chief has said the same thing. But so for Shannon Watts to come out and say, well, he was illegally carrying a gun, or for the ladies on The View, to at least one of them to say he broke the law by carrying a gun that day, absolutely not. That's a false statement. It's defamatory. And in fact, it's something we call defamation per se, which means you falsely accuse someone of committing a crime, and then that's defamation on its face. And so
that sounds like that's actionable.
There will be repercussions for people lying to the public, especially on again, I don't watch it, but something like The View. Or Shannon Watts has something like 500,000 followers. She made her comment on Twitter.
Then she deleted it, but all of us had already captured it, and I shared it. So.
Oh, yeah. I bet I had 100 people send me a screenshot of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I went back and responded, though, also before she deleted it, and said, I know, because she started hers, I don't know who needs to hear this, but. Right. And then went on to say, when a person illegally carries a gun in a mall, I said, well, I know who needs to hear this. You might want to look up defamation per se. And so I've called her on that.
When all this shakes out, I'm guessing that there will be some other ramifications coming from the legal side.
Well, it could be, and look, Eli's a shy, humble, great young man. He's not, looking to be litigious about the whole thing. At the same time, when people are out there lying and accusing you of committing a crime when all you did was put yourself in harm's way to save innocent lives, that's not something we should look the other way on.
All right. Well, Guy, hold on just a second here. I got to take a break. We're talking with Guy Relford. He is the attorney who is representing Eli Dicken, the young man who saved so many people in that mall in Indiana. I'm Tom Gresham. This is Gun Talk, 866-TALK-GUN. We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back to Gun Talk. Tom Gresham here. Our number is 866-TALK-GUN. We're talking with Guy Relford. He is the attorney representing Eli Dicken, the young man in Indiana who saved so many people in a mall when a crazy guy started shooting it up and killing people. You've represented a number of people who have used guns in self-defense, save themselves, save other people. Is there any kind of common thread that runs between all these folks?
A couple of things. One, they've all just been good people, invariably were willing to put themselves in harm's way like Eli did, typically to save other people. I represented a gentleman who protected himself and his coworkers from an armed robber with deadly force. I represented a man who, there was a person going through a complete paranoid schizophrenic breakdown, armed with a gun, had just killed a cemetery worker thinking he was a demon of some kind, was trying to kill another worker. They're actually running through traffic as the crazy guy is chasing his intended victim. And a gentleman sitting in traffic who had actually taken my class. I teach a class called Essentials of Indiana Gun Law, and I talk about the law of self-defense, talk about the aftermath of how, you should interact with cops or what you should or shouldn't say on a 911 call. That's why this man had taken my class and was sitting in traffic going into a little town called Brownsburg here in Indiana, and he knew the law of self-defense or defense of a third person, realized this is a life or death situation, and made the decision to, from a seated position inside his truck, shooting through the window, not through the glass, but it rolled the window down, from 25 feet away, saved the life of a guy who was about to be murdered by this person who had already killed his coworker. And I represented a lady who who protected a police officer who was about to be shot with his own gun after a traffic stop went bad, literally in the lady's front yard.
You just interviewed her.
Yeah, I interviewed her on my radio show on Saturday, and she had very powerful messages for Eli, and that was her purpose in coming on. But she saved the life of a police officer. But the commonality is really that they've all been just good people who are willing to put themselves in harm's way to protect others. But the other commonality is that they've all had to struggle a little bit with the idea that, hey, they've now taken a human life. They've made that ultimate decision to engage with deadly force. And they've all been heroes. They've all been, patted on the back and congratulated and rightfully called heroes. But they've all struggled a little bit with the idea that, they've had to make the decision to take a human life. And that's hard. That's hard to balance sometimes when you're struggling a little bit, but people are patting you on the back and calling you a hero and wanting to buy you a beer. And that's all appreciated. And the well wishes and the eloquent, beautiful messages that Eli's gotten, of thank you and congratulations and appreciation for saving innocent lives. You have to balance that with the fact that wasn't an easy decision, and every one of them would tell you they wish the whole thing had never happened.
Sure.
At the same time, there are innocent people walking around living and breathing right now because they made those decisions. And at the end of the day, that's, I think, what that and their faith a lot of times is what helps them get through this, is knowing there are innocent people that are alive today because of their heroism.
I got a thought here, Guy, and we're talking with Guy Relford. He's not only an attorney, firearms instructor, he's also the host of the Gun Guy with Guy Relford radio show. Is on WIBC?
Exactly, in Indianapolis.
Okay. As a firearms instructor, and then you're working with people who've used their guns in self-defense, and you got Eli, who, according to reports, shoots this guy at 40 yards, or the one you just talked about, shoots somebody at 25 feet or 25 yards. I'm wondering, back to your firearms instruction now, we've got that old thing that people keep repeating from, 30, 40, 50 years ago. The average gunfight is 3 to 5 yards, it's 3 to 5 shots, blah, blah, blah. How does the reality of what's actually going on inform your firearms instruction and what you teach these days?
Well, that's interesting. What I've always done is, we talk about self-defense distances, exactly as you just mentioned. And it is true. I mean, in one study of over 500 self-defense shootings, the most common distance was, quote, just beyond arm's length. Mm-hmm. And the average, as you mentioned, was something like 6 feet, and 90% were inside of 10 feet. So it is somewhat of an outlier that people are making longer shots at the same time as Eli Dicken proved in the mall a week ago Sunday. Even the gentleman I mentioned who was protecting a third person. When someone's attacking you, yes, I think that's very true that those distances are going to be very tight. Invariably. Again, a lot of times in the same study that I mentioned, they said there had been some physical contact between the two individuals before the shot was fired. So yeah, CQB or, close in distances, that's very true. I think what typically and most common when you're defending yourself, what that doesn't account for is potentially the need to protect other people. And here, and again, we can't get into the nitty gritty of the shooting quite yet until the police close their investigation, and then we'll get into all these details. But here you had someone all the way across a very large food court in a mall emerge from a bathroom shooting an AR, and had already started shooting as soon as he left the bathroom. As the police reported, shot someone who was entering the bathroom, and then came out of that hallway and he's shooting people in the food court. Eli was completely on the other end of the food court, and I'm just reciting here what police have already announced, 40 yards away. And for him to protect those innocent people, that's the shot he had to take. So what I've done, and I think I'll even expand on this from now on, is a lot of times, you're teaching CQB distance and you're teaching point shooting in the more advanced classes. Or the hip rock, which I'm sure you've done, sure. Which is a form of point shooting, exactly. Right. But what then I've always done is I've typically ended every class by running a target out 25 yards. And having a little competition on who's the best shot at 25 yards. And I think I'll build into that, because that's kind of a way to coalesce, all the other things you've learned in, on-site picture and trigger control and everything else, and test that a little bit at distance. But I think I'll build in a little bit that, hey, experience tells us that yes, defending yourself is probably going to be in tight. And that's where point shooting and whatnot is so important. But you may have to defend another person, and that may be fully justified. Because you've seen the same thing I have, I'm sure, Tom. People out on the internet saying, well, I never shoot at 25 yards because if you're shooting at 25 yards, it could never be justified. Right. Well, Eli Dicken completely blew that myth up.
Well, yeah, exactly right. And I've looked at, said, okay, if I'm in a theater, if I'm in someplace, and you start looking around, you go, if a guy came in over there and started shooting people, that's a lot. I mean, you talk about even your typical movie theater or even bigger, concert theater, something like that. Very possible for it to be 40 or 50 yards across the way. And you think, okay,
it could be,
if that happens, what am I going to do? And yes, somebody said this, guy, and I thought it was really interesting. He said, well, we're talking about self-defense, and then we're talking about defensive shooting, and the two are not necessarily the same, which is kind of going back to what you're talking about.
Well, exactly. And here in Indiana, where I practice law and where I teach classes, you can protect yourself, with deadly force under certain situations, but you can also defend third persons. And that's the law typically in every state. So exactly what you're talking about, Tom, where I think about all the time is in church. Because, I grew up, my dad was a pastor. And so I grew up in the church, and my dad just taught at a little small country church, but we go to a larger church now that has more like auditorium style seating. And where we sit, my wife gets annoyed with me because sometimes, she goes, oh, look, there are my parents. Let's go sit over there. I go, no, I don't want to sit over there. I want to sit up here because and you know why, right?
You're looking at sight lines. Yeah, I know what you're doing.
I'm looking at sight lines. I'm looking at points of entry. I'm looking at secondary points of exit, to get out of Dodge if that's the decision. But, so some of those shots, if somebody just walks in an entrance to a church and starts shooting. And in fact, speaking of churches, another great example, in the last 3 days, I've talked to both Stephen Williford, I bet you know that name.
Oh, yeah. Sulphur Springs.
And exactly, and Jack Wilson. They've both called me.
Oh, wow.
Wanting to get messages to Eli. How about that?
Wow.
And in both of those situations involving churches, there was a shot at distance. Jack Wilson's shot was 46 feet and had to make a headshot because everybody was standing up between him and the bad guy. And as you know, Stephen Williford engaged from across the way, coming out of his house, hearing the gunshots and seeing the bad guy emerge from the church. They had a running gunfight there at distance.
And Stephen Williford ran to the sound of the gun barefoot. Grabbed his AR and took off running because he said they're not going to be shooting up my church in my neighborhood. And that's one of the things I kind of get the feeling from a lot of these people is not here, not now, not in my church, not in my community. I'm just not going to put up with this.
Well, that's a really great way of putting it. And by the way, both of those guys getting a hold of me had the same concern. Is, hey, look, I know what Eli's going through. Please send him my thought, and shared really how they got through their situations. And very similar because they both got a lot of publicity. And obviously there's a tremendous amount of publicity around the heroism of Eli Dicken as well.
Guy, tell people where they can find out more about you and listen to your radio show, if you would, please.
Well, the radio show is on WIBC in Indianapolis, so you can listen to that live on the air over the internet at WIBC.com. Anybody hearing this who's driving through Indiana, it's also 93.1 FM in central Indiana.
Very good. And look, if you would, please, and I know there's just a lot of things that happen. And of course, kind of the arc of how this transpires. Keep us posted. And when you can talk about it, we'd love to get you back in here because I am sure there are things all of us would like to learn, not just like voyeurism, but actually learn from this and take away.
Well, there are takeaways, and I really will be happy to do that. We're anxious to get the real story out there. Some people, it's kind of funny. Anytime people are truly heroic, it seems like there's some element of society that wants to minimize what it is they've done.
Right.
And I've seen people say, oh, it was a typo that it was 40 yards. It was really 40 feet. No, it was 40 yards. But some of the other things, and even people keep sending me videos of people simulating what day. We all did this with Jack Wilson, right? Trying to make a shot on about a 10-inch target from 46 feet away. Well, now people are running the Dicken drill, right? Well, let me tell you, there are going to be a whole bunch of additional elements they're going to have to add to the Dicken drill to make it the real thing. And we'll go into all of that when the time's right. And I appreciate your patience on that point.
Absolutely. No, I understand. Look, and I appreciate you sharing some of the information with us, and also kind of your perspective from, this not being your first time working with this. I mean, and you have this unique perspective of being a gun junkie, like I am, a training junkie, a firearms instructor, a lawyer, and working with these people. And so I really appreciate what you bring to this.
Well, no, I appreciate the opportunity. I love what you're doing as well, Tom. We're very similar in that respect. So, keep up the good fight on your end, too. It's very much appreciated.
Thanks a bunch. Guy Relford, thank you so much.